Hi, I'm Jim Owens, and today I'll be discussing the article by Gallat Nimrod published in the International Journal of Communication entitled The Membership Life Cycle in Online Support Groups. And a few things are important to level set in regard to this. First of all, it's a quantitative study of roughly 560 people, 70% of whom were women, most all of whom were English speaking. 59% of the sample was from the US and 21% of it was from the UK. And only 7% of the people who responded to the questionnaire prepared by the researcher were actually from non-English speaking countries or where English was their primary language. And so I think a couple of things are important to level set about this with regard to research theory and some of the implications for group communications. First of all, these are not really what we would call a natural group sample. Even the groups that are the subsets of the 16 different support groups that Nimrod studied really aren't natural groups. And they're particularly permeable as it regards coming and going of membership. So the only motivation for anyone to be there is their own intrinsic nature. There's no external motivation. There are no decisions to be made. These are essentially leaderless groups, and yet people rise to be what other authors have called elders, and they essentially form the role of becoming a leader. Yes, they're moderated by people who have to maintain the social conventions of the particular group, but these are particularly unique groups in regard to their online support of one another. And the groups are largely, of these types, are largely people suffering from some socially stigmatized type of disorder or illness. So they include groups like people who are HIV positive or have AIDS. They include people who suffer from depression or even people who have disfigurement. And so one of the things that's important to me to think through about all this is the muted nature of demographics and things like gender and sex and even cognitive skill and antecedent experiences that might be related to what these people bring to the organization or the group, as it were. And I think there are there are many of them that we really can't tell from the research piece. We were only left to wonder, which was one of the frustrating pieces about reading this piece. There were so many other questions that it raised for me. And oddly, 1995, I remember Bryant Gumbel, at least I've seen the YouTube commentary on Today, on the Today Show, where he wondered out loud, what is this World Wide Web and what the heck does it have to do with us? And now we can't imagine operating without the web. And so from a communication standpoint, these groups are a relatively new experience for researchers that give us plenty of opportunity to think through a number of different things. So let's talk about the implications of gender and race and whatnot. If those things are muted within these groups, one wonders what impact they have. Clearly that the relative anonymity of such groups probably is a benefit to people. In socially stigmatized situations, the ability not to be identified publicly and risk the shame that's associated with it is probably healthy. That said, there are probably things that one might think that, say, people of similar race or gender might benefit from one another within a face-to-face context that we can't really measure, nor do they get compared in this study versus other studies in which face-to-face contact for similar purposes might have been explored. Now, when we look back at the responses, one of the things that's also important to note is that most of these people, the mean age of this group was 36. So that's relatively young, and one wonders also what this has to do, what impact this might have on communication. So you've got leaderless groups, you've got groups that from a bona fide theory are permeable and have borders that are expansive, people coming and going. And so it leaves us curious about what a longitudinal study might have to say about these same issues and these same definitions. Now, Nimrod in his work identifies the roles of distressed newcomer, active help receiver, passive follower, relieved survivor, active help provider, and moving on quitters. So in a sense, there are some lurkers within this group. Those are the people who are passive, and the moving on quitters might be people that we might think of as lurkers who might be leaving. Maybe they've already been impacted well by the group. But one of the things we just can't do is tell what the average life cycle of how one goes from being a distressed newcomer to an active help receiver, if in fact that's what happens, or to an active help, and ultimately to an active help provider. So I would say there are a couple of questions that really struck me in this. Because of the muting of gender, race, culture, and whatnot, I wondered how might cross-cultural, national, and cultural influences impact Nimrod's identification of member types? That is, what would different cultures bring to this particular assessment? And would people be more or less likely to communicate in these groups based on their background, their tendency for conformity and whatnot? And then finally, what impact does this relative anonymity of the membership have upon the membership life cycle and how they communicate? Are they more likely to help one another, to be more vulnerable, or more likely to risk? What types of, and what in fact, how are their own decision-making experiences affected by both their antecedent and their group experience while there? So I found this an intriguing article. I also found it being one that left me wanting more, and I also found it challenging because it was published in 2012, which means I have a problem with the Gregorian calendar. That said, I hope you found the commentary here useful, and I hope you have a good day. I look forward to your comments.